The old convent sat on the hill like a relic of forgotten sins, its towering spires cutting through the clouds like skeletal fingers. For years, it had been abandoned, left to decay as nature slowly reclaimed the land, swallowing the crumbling stone in thick vines and moss. The villagers whispered about the place. They said it was cursed. That the shadows in the windows weren't from the passing of time, but from something far darker. And most of all, they said, the sister of shadows still walked the halls. That was the story the nuns in the nearby chapel told Sister Isabella when she arrived at the gates of the old convent. They were thin, worn women, their skin like parchment and their eyes hollowed out by years of hard labor and prayer. They had warned her, but not with the solemn authority of those who speak of something that can be explained. No. They had spoken in fear, as though the very mention of the place would awaken something deep within the earth. Isabella, Mother Superior had said with a quiver in her voice, "We have sent you there for your own good, but you must know, the convent is not empty. Not in the way you think." Sister Isabella was young, eager, and determined to make her mark in the convent. She had been a novice for only 2 years, but there was something in her that set her apart from the others. It wasn't vanity or pride, but rather an unshakable resolve, an overwhelming need to prove herself. She had no fear of dark places or twisted fables. She believed in the purity of the Church, in the light of Christ, and in the power of prayer. So, when the order came for her to take up residence in the old convent, she had gone without hesitation. The journey to the convent had taken her several days, and by the time she arrived, the sun was dipping low beneath the horizon, casting long shadows over the twisted paths and overgrown gardens that led up to the crumbling structure. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. The place was suffocatingly quiet, as though the very land had given up on life. Isabella paused at the gates, the old iron twisted and rusted. She could feel the weight of something watching her, something ancient, hidden within the walls of the convent. She took a breath, stepped forward, and pushed the gate open. Inside, the convent was worse than she had imagined. The halls were cold, the stone floor uneven and slick with moisture. Large, jagged windows lined the walls, but the glass had long since been shattered, leaving only frames that let in the wind and the relentless rain. She could hear the creaking of the building as though it were alive, groaning under the weight of its own history. As she moved deeper into the convent, her footsteps echoed off the walls, a hollow, unnatural sound that seemed to resonate with the silence around her. Her lantern flickered and dimmed with each passing minute, the light weak against the overpowering darkness. She found her quarters on the second floor. It was a small room, barely more than a closet, with a single cot, a cracked mirror, and a small wooden crucifix nailed to the wall. The window here, unlike the others, had been boarded up, sealing off the outside world. She knelt by the cot and crossed herself, a gesture of peace and grounding, before praying for strength. The silence around her seemed to close in, thickening with every breath. She felt the weight of something unseen pressing against her, something that made her skin prickle with cold. When she finished, she stood, resolved. She had come here to find her purpose, and she would not be swayed by the whispers of the past. That night, Sister Isabella lay in the cot, her eyes open as she stared at the darkness around her. The air was thick with the smell of mold and rot, but there was something else, a faint odor she couldn't place. Her senses, already heightened by her unease, seemed to sharpen, making every creak of the floorboards sound like a shout. She rolled over, trying to get comfortable, but something about the room felt wrong. It was as if the shadows themselves were watching her. She glanced toward the cracked mirror on the wall, where the faint outline of her own reflection seemed more like a ghost than a living soul. And then, in the stillness, she heard it. A whisper. Soft at first, like a breath of wind, then louder. Clearer. Isabella sat up, her heart hammering in her chest. She listened, straining in the dark. The sound came again, this time, a word, just one, though it was so low and guttural that it sent a chill down her spine. Sister. She froze, her body tense, her mind racing. She was sure she had heard something. But, was it her imagination? Had she let the stories of the place creep into her mind? She sat there in the dark, waiting for the next sound, but there was nothing. The silence swallowed her once again. She lay back down, trying to convince herself that she was just tired. It had been a long journey, after all. She closed her eyes, but sleep eluded her. And then, the door creaked open. Her eyes snapped open, and she gasped. The door to her room was slowly inching forward, the wooden frame groaning under the pressure, though there was no wind to explain its movement. Isabella's breath caught in her throat as the door opened just a crack, revealing the hallway outside, a hallway that was pitch black. The shadows seemed to stretch toward her, curling around the doorframe like long, twisted fingers. She didn't move. She couldn't. Her body was frozen in place. But then she heard it, footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the darkness beyond the doorway. Soft, muffled steps. They moved closer, and closer still, until they stopped just outside her room. The door creaked open wider. She could see a figure now, just beyond the threshold. A dark silhouette. A woman. Sister Isabella wanted to scream, but no sound came from her mouth. Her lungs were empty, her voice gone. She wanted to run, to flee, but her legs were heavy, weighted down as though by some invisible force. Her body refused to move. The figure took a single step into the room, and then stopped. The woman was dressed in the black habit of a nun, her face hidden beneath the veil. But there was something wrong about her. Something that twisted the image of a nun into something monstrous. The shadows seemed to cling to her, pulling around her feet, as if she were a part of the darkness itself. Isabella tried to speak, tried to ask who the woman was, but the words caught in her throat. She couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. The figure raised its head, slowly, and the veil fell back, revealing the face beneath. It was a face that Isabella recognized. It was her own. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Sister Isabella barely slept, and when morning came, she was trembling with fear and exhaustion. She had no idea if what she had seen was real or if it had been a nightmare. But the feeling, the overwhelming sense of dread, lingered long after the dawn. She spent the next few days wandering through the convent, exploring its dark corners, the long corridors where the light seemed to flicker and fade at will. It was in these places that the air felt thick, the walls closing in on her, as though they were watching her, waiting for something. The whispers never stopped. Always just beyond the edge of her hearing, but persistent, like a song she couldn't quite remember. And then, on the fourth night, she saw it again. This time, the Sister of Shadows did not come in the dark hours of the morning. No, this time she came at twilight, when the sun had just set and the shadows grew long. Isabella had been in the chapel, praying for guidance, when she had heard the faintest sound, footsteps, moving steadily across the stone floor. She turned toward the entrance of the chapel, her heart racing in her chest. There, standing in the doorway, was the sister. This time, she was closer, her form clearer, the veil lifted to reveal the same pale, hollowed face. But now it was not her reflection in the woman's face. It was something worse. The sister's eyes gleamed, hollow and black as the pits of hell. Isabella's legs gave way beneath her, and she fell to her knees, praying, begging for mercy. And then the sister stepped forward, and the shadows around her swallowed the light, plunging the chapel into darkness.